Today I want to take a critical look at the orbital physics of the comet in Outer Wilds, the Interloper. But before doing that, I have to acknowledge that obviously none of the orbital mechanics of Outer Wilds make much sense under scrutiny. Actually, fun fact, the planets can't be this small. The main issue that makes the Interloper stand out from the other planets in the game is that its orbit intersects with the orbits of all the other planets. This sort of highly eccentric orbit is common in real life for objects that were captured by the gravity of a planet or star, and playing through the game we find that this was indeed the case for the Interloper, having been captured by the Sun hundreds of thousands of years before the start of the game. One of the main noteworthy mechanics of Outer Wilds is its 22-minute time loop, which forces the game to reset periodically. Around 17 minutes into this loop, the Sun starts entering its red giant phase, expanding and causing the Interloper to crash into it and be destroyed. If you mod the game to remove the time loop and stop the Interloper from falling into the Sun, the comet instead inevitably crashes into something else. There's no way the solar system could have existed in this state for the millennia since the Interloper was caught in the Sun's orbit, if it can't even last 28 minutes after the start of the game. Fun side note, the game actually has to deal with the impossibility of the Interloper's orbit when you start up a new game. On a fresh save, the time loop hasn't started yet, and you can spend as long as you want just wandering around the village, taking in the sights, and finishing the tutorials. In the event that you actually take longer than 22 minutes to do this, the game actually manually deletes the Interloper from existence, since it vanishing would be less noticeable than it ramming into Timberhearth and killing you. Once the time loop starts, they just bring the Interloper back and away you go. The best part of all this is that the script which handles this is called Temp Comet Collision Fix. 5 years after the game was initially released, we see that there is of course nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. How could we go about fixing this? Well, first up, we can try changing the inclination of its orbit. This means making it tilted relative to the orbital plane of the solar system. And as one would expect, putting the Interloper on an inclined orbit does the trick. It can't hit any other planets now since its orbit doesn't intersect with them anymore. This also feels a bit more realistic. For a captured body like the Interloper, the odds that it would fly in at this perfectly aligned angle are quite low. Still, it feels like cheating. The devs clearly had a vision in mind, keeping all planets orbiting in the same plane. So is it possible to adjust their orbits to have all the planets in the same plane without the Interloper hitting any of them? To figure that out, we first need to talk about orbital resonance. This is when planets or moons will have integer ratios between the lengths of their orbital periods due to gravitational effects. A prime real-life example of this phenomenon is found among the moons of Jupiter, where there's a 1 to 2 to 4 resonance between the three innermost moons, Io, Europa, and Ganymede. This means that if the moons all started in a straight line, in the time it takes Ganymede to go around Jupiter once, Europa will have gone around exactly twice, and Io exactly 4 times. So we have a cycle here that perfectly repeats itself over and over. So if the planets in the solar system all had a nice resonance, it would remove a lot of the randomness. If the Interloper survives a full period of the planets all rotating around the Sun, then since we know that the cycle will just repeat infinitely, we can be confident that it will survive forever, never crashing into any of the planets. Well, it survives until the Sun expands and consumes it. So I've tweaked the orbital distances of all the planets to set up a 44-minute cycle with 24 orbits of the Twins, 12 orbits of Timberhearth, 6 orbits of Brutal Hollow, 4 orbits of Giant's Deep, 3 orbits of Dark Bramble, and 6 orbits of the Interloper. This is the closest I can get to the original orbits within a reasonable amount of time. To do this, I'm just following Kepler's laws to find the orbital distances for each planet that give them an orbital period that is some multiple of that of the Hourglass Twins, which I'm using as a baseline. Another fun fact, Dark Bramble actually has an orbital resonance with the Twins by default, completing exactly 1 orbit for each 8 orbits of the Twins. With these new initial distances, the planets are turning, and okay, well, it's still running into Timberhearth. Adjusting the starting angles, and now it's hitting Giant's Deep. And this one is just insulting. It immediately bounced off the Twins and fell into the Sun. Okay, this isn't working. You know what, I'm just going to start all the planets off perfectly aligned and let that run for 44 minutes. And look, it worked, I think. Not gonna lie, I didn't watch for the full 44 minutes, but if it hit something, it didn't get stuck, so I consider that a win at least. Anyway, there you go, Mobius. I've fixed your solar system. No idea how you guys won a BAFTA with this clear defect making the game nigh unplayable. We've found 2 options for making the Interloper's orbit actually possible for longer than 22 minutes, Either make it realistically inclined, or make it somewhat less realistically in a perfect orbital resonance with all the other planets. I think it might still be able to run into a moon though, since I didn't change their periods to be some fraction of the resonance period. That would have been harder to do since the moons follow their own entirely different non-Newtonian law for gravity in their orbits. You can check out my other video on gravity in outer wilds if you want to know what's up with that. Okay, bye. Also, it's definitely clipping through the White Hole Station and maybe even the Sun Station, though. That's, oh well.